Hey BookTube, it's Jackie. How's it going? If you're new to me and this is the first time you're seeing my face, hello, what's up? My name's Jackie. I sit on my floor and I talk about books. So I hope that's why you're here, because that's what's going to be happening. If you are not new to me, thank you for always tuning in, the continued support. I really do appreciate it. So today for you, I have a special video. I saw Sam over at Thoughts on Tomes do this a while ago, and I thought it was a really cool idea, perfect for the spooky season. So I wanted to do my own version of it, and that is books that haunt me. Every book I'm about to talk about are all books that might not necessarily live rent-free in my head, but every once in a while they pop back up to remind me of something, or just to simply remind me that they're still there. So without further ado, grab yourself a drink, have yourself a seat, and let's get talking about the books that haunt me. Okay, so when I was coming up with this list, I originally was going with books that just kind of live rent-free in my head. And then I realized that that's not really haunting me. Haunting to me is things that linger in your memory. They're there, but they're not always there. They pop up when they choose to appear for one reason or another. Whether, it's a message that you need, or it's a lesson to remind you that you've already learned, so don't fuck it up again. Or just to simply say, hey, guess what? I'm still here. You're going to feel uncomfortable for a little bit. Yes. So once I started looking through that lens, my list significantly lessened to about 7 books. And I would like to tell you about those. So the 7 books that I have, I am going to be going down in the order that I read them in, from most recent to most past. So the most recent one I read to, and going backwards. And the first one I have is M. Gira's The Consumer. It looks like this. I read this book back in 2016 when I first started my YouTube channel, and I actually have a full book review for it, and I'll link it in the card up here along with the down box below. And this book, I'm pretty sure this book haunts me because it was a visceral experience. This is one of the first books that's ever made me physically put it down because I was going to throw up. And I've got a very, very thick stomach. I can handle a lot. I can handle blood, guts, gore, all of that. But this book, with the way it put all of those components together, along with the themes that were being portrayed through this book, I had to physically change my reading experience for this book. I couldn't eat before I read this book. I couldn't eat a couple hours after reading this book, and I could not read this book before I went to bed because it was that disturbing. This is nothing more than a collection of short stories, prose, and vignettes, and they range from surrealistic organ distortion to drug-infused hallucinatory sexual nightmares and grotesque organic delusions. Yeah, there's a lot of acid trips in this book. There's a lot of graphic content in this book. Lots of graphic content in this book. This book is actually no longer in publication. I had to sign a waiver at my library through interlibrary loan to get a copy of this book because it's no longer in publication. And you can still find a copy to buy, but you're just going to be spending quite a lot on it. And I saw this book on Cliff Sargent's channel, Better Than Food Book Reviews, and he was reviewing it. And I was like, there's no way this book is that depraved or that dark or that twisted. Fuck that. I need to know. I was that kid. And so I got it. It took me a while, but I got it. And I'll be damned if not, he wasn't right. This book, every once in a while, when something really twisted or really depraved happens in one of my dark romance novels or in a movie or just in general, this book will pop into my head and it will remind me, if you can handle this, you can handle that. Because I don't have to physically change my reading experience or living experience for what I'm experiencing right now, but I had to for this. So this book haunts me and it pops up every once in a while And every once in a while, I'll be sitting there eating something. I'll be eating a steak and I will remember one of the stories and I'll be like, I can't eat this steak anymore. Damn it. No, I really hate it when it does that with my food because I like food, okay? That's annoying. But yeah, this is crazy. But it was excellent. It is crazy excellent because for as dark and depraved as this book was, there were so many kernels of brilliant philosophical content in it that it was awesome. I definitely enjoyed my experience with this, even though I had to literally alter my whole reading experience just to accommodate this book. So yeah, definitely haunts me in good and bad. The next book that haunts me is actually my favorite book, and that is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. The first time I read this book was in 2012, and I had had it on my shelf for years prior to that. And I finally picked it up and I read it. And this book, although I recommend this book all the time, I talk about this book all the time, this book haunts me in a different way. Because when I first read this book, I wasn't in the most healthy relationship. And I wasn't seeking what I actually deserved and what my self-worth was. And when I read this book and I read Jamie for the first time, that's when a big, huge light bulb went off in my life. And I realized that I deserved better. This book is the reason that I got out of that relationship and started basically measuring people to Jamie. Jamie became the measurement of men for me when I first read this book. And it haunts me to this day that no, I will never find Jamie, but I have found someone really, really close. Really fucking close. And I didn't have to travel the 1700s to get him. I actually went to high school with him. How funny is that? But no, this book haunts me in some of the best ways. It reminds me of who I was and who I became after reading this book. There's definitely a before Outlander Jackie and an after Outlander Jackie. And although outwardly they still look the same and a lot of their characteristics are still the same, their values are, majority of their values are quite different. So yes, this book haunts me for many positive reasons. So it can haunt me all at once. I love this book. If you have not read this book, you need to, and let it haunt you because it is amazing. It is one of the few books that I declare is perfect. I don't have a single goddamn gripe with this book. A single one of them. This thing is stunning. Absolutely perfect. The next book that haunts me is a book that I hated. I hated this book. I hated reading this book until the very end. And that is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I read this back in 2005 for an intro to literature course, and we were assigned it, and I hated it. Everyone in my class loved it. We were all discussing it. They all had positive things to say. I hated it until the very last chapter. And after reading the very last chapter, I remember clear as day walking back into that class and realizing that I love this book and nobody else does. It was a complete and total flip. 100%. And this book, let me just read you the back. They carried malaria tablets, love letters, 28-pound mine detectors, dope, illustrated Bibles, each other. And if they made it home alive, they carried unrelenting images of nightmarish war that history is only beginning to absorb. Since its first publication, The Things They Carried has become an unparalleled Vietnam testament, a classic work of American literature, and a profound study of men at war that illuminates the capacity and the limits of the human heart and soul. Everybody loved this book because of the stories from the Vietnam War. I hated this book because of the stories from the Vietnam War. What I loved about this book and why this book haunts me to this day is because the very last chapter, you find out they're nothing but stories. This is fiction. Everything in it is fiction, but it reads like it's not. And the last chapter confirms that it's fiction. And when I read that last chapter, it propelled me to my area of study now, which is history. Because I always believed that history was his or her story. And if you want to be remembered, you better make sure your story's worth telling. Because in the end, yes, they carried physical objects. Every single story in this book is about a different object that was carried. But the real thing they carried, it wasn't the object, it was the story behind it. So if you want to be remembered, you better have a goddamn good story to tell. Because that's what people are going to remember. That's what people are going to carry. That's what people are going to pass on. And I just love that. So this book haunts me because it pushed me into my area of study. It allowed me to really see that clarification. And so whenever something momentous happens, I try really hard to remember the story, where I was, how I was feeling, what I was doing when I experienced it, because that's the story that's going to remain, at least for me. And I love this book. And also, this was my very first autographed book. It was the first autographed book I ever got. Where is it? My very first autographed book. So, another hauntingly amazing memory for me. The next book that haunts me, I read in 2002, my freshman year in high school, and that is Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. This book I have reread this year. It still holds its weight as amazing. I love this thing. But this book haunts me because of the message it continuously tells me. So in this story, we follow Melinda Sordino, who is entering freshman year in high school, and she goes to a party where something very traumatic happens to her, and it prevents her from really experiencing high school because she refuses to talk about it. And it bubbles and festers, and it permeates her entire life, and it destroys different elements, her friendships, her relationships, until she finally talks about it. This book haunts me all the time when I don't want to talk about something that bothers me. It will pop up in those moments and say, Melinda didn't talk, and remember what happened to her? And so I talk about it. I don't bury things under the rug because, yeah, you could sweep the dirt under the rug and it looks all nice, clean, and pristine, but when you lift the rug up, the dirt's still fucking there, okay? You got to get rid of the dirt. You got to talk. And this book always haunts me when there's something I don't want to talk about or something that's bothering me. It will pop up and remind me, you need to talk. You need to talk it out. And I remember clear as day, freshman year, being assigned a book report and having to go get a book from the library, and I picked this one and I read it in one sitting. I was so engrossed in it. I sat there and I read it in one sitting. And I went back to school and talked it up so much that there became a 3-month waiting list for this book. This book swept my school, and I was one of the first people to read it. And I love this book. It's one of my favorites. And having reread it again this year, this thing still holds true. Still. The next book that haunts me is this guy, The Wave by Todd Strasser. Oh God, this book. Oh God. Okay, so this book I was assigned to read in 2002. It was a summer reading novel prior to the entry to my sophomore year English class with Mrs. Maris. And one reason why it haunts me is because Mrs. Maris died my sophomore year in the middle of the year. Shortly after discussing this book, she passed away. She was a very, very sweet lady, and she knew her shit. She was awesome. that kind of rocked our school. So this book not only haunts me, but it does have a painful memory to go with it. This book is a fictional story, but it's based on the true incident that occurred in a Palo Alto, California high school in 1969. History teacher Bert Ross introduces the wave to his history class to demonstrate how easily the power of group pressure can ensure systems such as Nazism to occur. Essentially, he introduces this wave to his high school history class and says, you guys are special. You guys are perfect. You are the elite. And it starts to build this confidence in this class, and then starts to permeate outside the class, and people are ditching classes to come in, and this wave just swarms the school. And I remember reading this book and just devouring it. During the summer, I just plowed through it because it was so engrossing. It was so mesmerizing. And I'll be damned if this book doesn't stick with me. I still talk about this book every couple of months. Situations will pop up that this book can help alleviate, can help explain, can help, different situations. But the memory I have the most with this book that always pops up is a story that I wrote based off of it. One of our assignments was we had to write a 10-year high school class reunion to this book, the class that experienced the wave. And I remember Mrs. Maris having me read mine in class, and a lot of people afterwards saying they could hear a pin drop after I read my story because it was that good. It was that moving. It wasn't happy. That's the thing I remember the most about that story, is it wasn't happy, because not everybody in this book has a happy ending. And I remember a lot of my kids in my class giving every character a happy ending, and I didn't. I gave the one that was scarred the most the worst possible ending. Because sometimes things you go through, they're just too much. And this book reminds me that you can't let things you go through affect what you want. You have to let it go. You have to move on. You have to find your place. Even if your place is something that you have to create yourself. And this book has always stuck with me. And I just fucking love this book. I love this thing. And I really need to own a copy of it in my library for my own personal sanity. But every once in a while, that high school class will pop up. And I remember that scene in the gymnasium with the history teacher, and all the student body has their wave patches on and their chants, and they're all happy and go lucky, and the misfit kid who finally fit in because he happened to be in the original history class finally found his place, and then it was taken away. And I just remember that scene so vividly that every once in a while when I see instances like that, it reminds me to keep my guard up, because the place that you created might be taken away. And you just have to go about and redo it. You have to keep creating the place that you fit, or find a different place to fit in. So yeah, this book has always stuck with me. Good and bad memories with this one, for sure. The next book that sticks with me is this guy, The Thorn Birds by Colleen McCullough. I read this book in the 8th grade in 2000. This is the saga of the Cleary family, and it spans 3 generations. It begins with poverty and struggles on behalf of Fiona and Patty Cleary with their 9 children, 8 sons and 1 daughter, Meggie, who we follow majority of the time, and Father Ralph D. Burcassert. I think is how you say his name. This book haunts me because this was the first book that I ever remember reading that made me cry. This book is the first one I can remember making me physically cry in a classroom. And I remember sitting in Mrs. Pearson's 8th grade class. It was study hall, 8th grade study hall. And I was sitting there, and one of the pivotal scenes at the very end of the book happens. And I put the book down and just started bawling my eyes out, because it was so painful. It was so painful. And in that moment, I remembered that I learned that it's okay to cry. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel stupid. I didn't feel silly, even though people did make fun of me. I didn't care. I was crying for the characters. This book haunts me because it's the first time that I really got attached to characters, to a love story, to a family, to a person, to a concept. I got attached to all of these characters. And when that pivotal moment happens at the very... it still, to this day, affects me. I have refused to watch the miniseries that is based off of this book because I do not want to ruin the experience I have with this book. I don't want it messed with at all. I want that memory to stay intact at all times. And when this book pops up in my head, and it does occasionally, it reminds me that I have come a long way, because in this book, we deal with family drama, we deal with emotional drama, we deal with very taboo elements. Father Ralph Percasset develops affection for Maggie when she's a very small child and watches her grow up. And then we have a romance between them. Yeah, a lot of taboo elements. And then that very final scene, oh God. This is also the first book that I realized having different POVs of characters was something that I really enjoyed, because this book is told from different perspectives and different chapters. So you only have the perspective of that one person who's telling the chapter. And I thought that was awesome. I remember really, really enjoying that element as well. But this thing had a emotional and visceral memory for me, and it pops up every once in a while and reminds me of it. And when I read Sierra Simone's Priest, this definitely popped into my head a lot of times. I was like, wow. I've been reading this shit since the 8th grade. Holy shit. Damn. So that was definitely a moment for me. Definitely a haunting one. Haunting, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I really should reread this book, but I don't want to tarnish that memory. That's a tough one. It's a tough choice. And the last book that haunts me, and not every story in this book haunts me, but there's one. There's one. And this is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. I don't remember exactly what year I was in 3rd grade. I didn't want to do the math. But in 3rd grade, I checked this book out from our little classroom library. And I read all the stories. And one of the stories is The Girl with the Green Ribbon. You might see this, but remember this image. This is the love story between Jenny and Alfred. Jenny and Alfred love each other, and they have a long, happy life. But Jenny always wears this green ribbon around her neck. And Alfred constantly asks her, why the green ribbon? And all Jenny says is, I'll tell you when you're ready, when it's time. Or some variation of that. Now, this story is extremely old, so I am going to spoil this for you. But if you have not read this story, go pick it up. Seriously. But I'm going to spoil it, because that's why it haunts me, is the ending. After their long, happy life, Jenny is on her deathbed. And she looks at Alfred and finally says, do you want to know the story behind the green ribbon? He says, yes, honey, I want to know. Untie it. And so he unties it, and her head falls off. In the third grade, I clearly remember reading that for the first time and just, what the fuck? I didn't say fuck, but I sure as shit thought that. But I remember being shocked and just kind of holding the book like this, like, I don't know what to do. Mrs. Patton, which is my third grade teacher's name, is this child appropriate? I remember losing my shit. And I never forgot that fucking story. I never forgot it. Ever. I never forgot it. This is also when I started reading Goosebumps. Because I like this story so much. Mrs. Patton gave me my first Goosebump book. And, well, I got married on Halloween, if that explains anything. On purpose. Yes, this book haunts me because every once in a while, I'll see a green scarf or a green ribbon and I'll, boom, right in my head. Right there. It is that third grade kid sitting on the floor holding his book saying, ah, her head fell off. What do I do? Every fucking time. Every time. This shit scarred me as a child. But it's a memory I wouldn't trade for a million years. So it can haunt me anytime it wants. It can bring that memory back. Those are the 7 books that haunt me. What books haunt you? See you guys later.